Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, complete with our props we have every program. I've got Fat Albert, the Rubik's Cube that represents the complexity and the ever-changing nature of the income tax code. And you have your trusty scrolling banner.
Let me tell you, these things are not very expensive, and you can buy two or three of it at a time. And if you're out somewhere at a meeting of some kind, where a town hall meeting in the next couple of 3 months, you can certainly use the scrolling banner. You just make sure you stand behind whoever's talking on the live TV camera.
Yeah, I'm still expecting you next college basketball season to take that to at least one of the Wake Forest games and sit behind the basket and get that on TV when they're showing a guy shooting free throws.
I'm working on having this be like a banner transported across the Joel by a drone. We'll see.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, I can fly the drone for you. That's not a problem. But
right, that's right. All about that stuff, don't you? Well, that's
all
great.
right. Well, wait a minute. I can't get a FAIRtax Power Radio show going without cracking open a can of cheerwine here. So just wait a minute, and you're going to try to listen for it. This microphone probably is not going to pick this up very well, but there you go. I don't know if you heard that or not. But
There's a billboard for North Carolina's favorite cherry soda between Winston-Salem and Greensboro. I see it every time I go over there, and I think about you, Bob.
there you go. Well, Cheerwine and Eastern North Carolina barbecue. You can't go anywhere. Of course, all the barbecue I've got now is still frozen. I don't have any I can get into. All right, let's get on into the program here. We don't want to do too many little funny preliminaries to start with. And as always, let's get going with our weekly look at Congress.gov and what the Congress critters are trying to do to the tax code. And let's see, we will start. In fact, this one, you could see this one coming.
Yeah.
The last couple of Trump rallies, he has mentioned that he wanted to eliminate income taxes on tips. People who get tips, that would become tax-free income under what he would like to see happen. And now there are a couple of bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, to actually make that happen. S 4621, the bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to eliminate the application of the income tax on cash tips through a deduction allowed to all individual taxpayers. I'm not quite sure how you give a deduction to all individual taxpayers and target those that are receiving tips, but that was from Senator Ted Cruz. It's got a grand total of 3 co-sponsors at the moment. And I don't know if it's exactly a companion bill, but a similar bill in the House, H.R. 8785, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide that tips shall not be subject to income or employment taxes. That's Representative Massey from Kentucky.
I wonder how many are going to, just start working for tips, no matter where they work. I mean,
Yeah.
when you think about it, disc jockeys, for example, could possibly align themselves with a tip jar, a virtual tip jar. They do, and all of a sudden you've got this new industry built up that's tips. Are we going to
Yeah.
contain it just to restaurant workers or bar workers and that kind of thing? Anybody that gets a tip, for that matter, could be a caddy at a golf course.
Yeah, you can set up your tip jar. If somebody calls in to request a song, you could request to put a couple of shekels in the tip bar there. And
as long as it's not considered payola.
oh yeah, that would be a problem in your industry, wouldn't it? They had a big issue with that. But well, just play the one they like, and then that works. Okay. Well, I know that we're just coming back off of this cruise from Alaska, and the cruise lines actually add a crew gratuity charge to your
Really?
onboard account. You are
Really?
charged in the neighborhood of like $16 per person per day to provide gratuities to all the service people that are on a cruise ship. The food service workers, the housekeeping, the room attendants. So a good bit, I think, the officers that actually drive the ship don't get tips, but just about everybody else that works on a cruise ship does. So this would help them out, I'm sure.
Yeah, that absolutely. I think there'll be an entire industry. Anytime you reduce taxes on anything, you have more activity in that particular category, whatever it ends up being. So, heck
All
yeah.
right. Well, let's move on here so we'll have plenty of time to continue with our little look through the FAIRtax book. This is H.R. 8776 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to treat membership in a healthcare sharing ministry as a medical expense or for other purposes. I'm sure you're familiar with stuff. I think MediShare is the one that's probably most well known out there.
A lot of people have heard about that. It's an interesting concept in sharing medical expenses, and
Yeah,
it's on an insurance model. The insurance company is betting that you're going to get sick, and you're betting that you're not.
yeah, but these healthcare sharing ministries are not technically insurance. There is no contract. They are not under any legal obligation to pay you a dime if you submit, a claim to them. But
Mhm.
they say they work, and that's really not our issue. The pros and cons of these healthcare sharing ministries, but they want to amend the Internal Revenue Code to allow membership. You're assigned a particular contribution level that you make every month. We had to do this for a few months before my wife is quite eligible for Medicare. There were a
Uh,
couple of months between the time that she actually retired, her job moved to Mexico, and the time she could get on Medicare. So we had her on one of those things for a little while. Fortunately, we didn't have to use it. But anyway, let's move on here. This is S from the Senate side, S 4584, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to allow a business credit for gain from the sale of real property for use as a manufactured home community and for other purposes.
of course, for other purposes. Why would
Absolutely.
the door wide open for anything that might come up in the future?
Oh, well, that's it. That is a Representative Gene Shaheen from New Hampshire
Yeah.
to allow a business credit for gain for this. I guess if you sell your property and to an outfit that's going to use it as a manufactured home community, they want to give you a tax credit for that. I guess they're trying to encourage folks to do that. And again, that is one of the huge problems with the income tax codes we've got now. It is
Yeah.
used for so many purposes other than just collecting revenue for the government. The tax code is used, 11,000 different ways to try to influence your behavior in one way or another by giving you a reward for what they'd like to see you do, or socking you with a penalty if you do something that the powers that be up there that are in charge of the tax code don't want you to do. And
Right.
again, all of that goes away with the fair tax. The fair tax simply collects money for the government, period. It's not used for social engineering. It's not used to push any political agendas. All of this stuff goes away with the fair tax. When we dump out the bowl of spaghetti into the trash can and replace it with a nice little Eastern North Carolina barbecue sandwich known as the fair tax. So that works.
That's right. That's right. With barbecue slaw lathered on top.
Oh, I love slaw, but slaw doesn't like me. That would give me a diverticulitis episode and put me in the hospital. So I think I'll pass on the slaw. Anyway, one more here. HR 8738.
Slaw on
Oh,
up here. I'll give you my address after the show.
oh, but that barbecue slaw in North Carolina is just amazingly good. HR 8738 to amend the Internal Revenue Code, another credit to provide a credit against tax for certain health professionals providing clinical supervision to students in rural health professional shortage areas. So if you got a place that's out in the sticks that does not have very many health professionals out there, and you are a health professional that will go out there and provide supervision to students who will learn how to do all this stuff in those areas where there is a shortage of health professionals, if Representative Brittany Pedersen of Colorado gets her way, then you get a tax credit for doing that. Okay.
Credit. Everybody got to have some credit. Credit.
Yes, yes, yes. I still, I think when we were trying to find out a while back how many different credits there are, in the Internal Revenue Code, and we asked several artificial intelligence, programs to dig that out for us. I don't think we ever really got a definitive answer. I think John Gaver came up with like 240, if I'm remembering right, at one point.
Well,
But
no, the
it's
artificial intelligence algorithm is not going to give you anything if it can't figure it out itself. It's not going to
yeah.
give you a good answer.
All right. Well, let's get going back here with probably the most important chapter here in the original Bortz and Linder FAIRtax book that we've been going through here on FAIRtax Power Radio.
Yeah.
We are now up to chapter 9, and that is the FAIRtax prebate. Something we, obviously talk about a good bit here on FAIRtax Power Radio because it is actually an amazing provision within the FAIRtax that no other sales tax that I know anything about has in it. So people who are not familiar with the FAIRtax, and we try to explain what the prebate is, they get, what? They get confused about it. And unfortunately, a lot of people will demagogue that and say, oh, that's just another new entitlement. And this, that, and the other. But the FAIRtax book goes over the FAIRtax prebate in chapter 9 and calls it the key to fairness. And that here it is. There's let me quote a little bit from the very beginning of this chapter. Perhaps you noticed that in quite a few congressional races around the country last year, some candidates tried to frighten voters into believing that their opponent, a supporter of the FAIRtax, was planning to burden them with a horrible new tax. Here's how they spun it. Their opponent was going to add a 23% federal retail sales tax on everything we buy, implying, if not claiming outright, that this would be in addition to all the other taxes we're already paying. Is this effective politics? Oh, yeah, you bet it is. Can you imagine how frightened any American, especially a lower income one, would be at the prospect of paying 23% more everything you buy? And that's how they spend this. But the prebate is the feature within the FAIRtax that just turns that on its head and says that's not going to happen. Would you care to explain that, Fair Kimosabe?
Well, I think folks, live in the soundbite era of nightly television news or wherever the information is coming from, and we're not having the opportunity. We, meaning the general public, doesn't have the opportunity necessarily to dig in a little deeper to really find out what's going on. All they hear is, can you imagine 23% on top of what you're already paying now? It's preposterous. And that's where they leave it. And the chapter goes on to say anyone who believed that a candidate was going to do such a thing should not only have voted against that candidate, they should feel compelled to get out there and raise money to defeat them.
Oh, yeah. I have heard ads just like that right here in my congressional district, and they're just as dishonest as they could be. But let's skip on ahead a little bit. The FAIRtax book here says, we absolutely recognize that the idea of the FAIRtax would die a quick and grisly death if its only effect were to hit the poor with a 23% sales tax on top of today's prices for a gallon of milk or a loaf of bread. This, in fact, is the disingenuous charge that's been leveled by those who fear a loss of power should the FAIRtax be enacted. Thankfully, this scenario would be far removed from reality under the FAIRtax. As you read, you will learn that the 23% FAIRtax, which is included in the price of retail goods and services, is not added to it, but the FAIRtax with this prebate feature could turn out to be the best poverty-fighting tool ever devised in this country since the concept of hard work. And what the prebate is, in a nutshell, it is a tax refund. And people are familiar with the concept of a tax refund because a lot of times when their withholding exceeds their income tax liability, wow, around April 15th, I get money from the government. You're just getting your change back. You're getting back stuff that was taken from you that was not owed. You made a $12 purchase with a $20 bill, you got back $8. And that's what your tax refund is. And the FAIRtax prebate is actually the same thing because there is just no logistical way on God's green earth you're going to charge or not charge the tax based on whether a person's spending level has exceeded the poverty level yet. So they just collect the tax on every retail sale. But since you do not owe the tax on the retail purchase of your goods and services needed for your basic necessities, i.e., you're spending up to the poverty level, the prebate is a refund that gives you back those taxes that you paid at the register that you do not owe. That is what the prebate is. It is not a new entitlement. It is not, the government giving you somebody else's money. You are getting back your own money that was collected from you that you didn't owe. And that is what the prebate is, which means that with the fair tax, you do not take a dime out of your own pocket to pay the fair tax until your spending exceeds the poverty level. And as we like to say here, you feed your family before you feed the government with the fair tax.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of folks when you stop and take a minute to dig into the information in this book, the FAIRtax book, which came out 20 years ago or so, something like that, has a lot of information in it that you can pore over. You don't get the 30-second soundbite version from somebody who's against it. And sometimes people have a hard time figuring out, okay, well, we've got the prebate. It's basically tied to the annual calculation that the federal government makes for poverty level dollars.
Yes.
In other words, income is at poverty level. You get, based on the number of people in your household, you as a single person, a husband and wife, husband and 2 kids, 4 kids, etc. And you get that money back ahead of the spending. It's not an entitlement, and that I think is where a lot of people get confused. You get to decide with that money that you get as the prebate what you're going to spend it on during that next 30-day cycle or that next month, because you're going to get another prebate at the beginning of the next month and so on and so forth. So not only do you have that, but you also get everything in your check. You're not going to have Social Security taxes or Medicare taxes withheld from your paycheck. Whatever you earn, you get on payday. We categorize for the folks that we say are essentially poor would mean an immediate 25 to 30% increase in their take-home pay, because that federal income tax and the Social Security Medicare taxes are not coming out. The payroll tax isn't coming out. The Social Security, the Medicare taxes are not coming out immediately. A 25 to 30% increase in your take-home pay. This is all based on the information available that John Linder and Neil Bortz supplied in the FAIRtax book as the I guess it was 2005 when it came out.
This book came out in 2005.
So remember that 22% is already inflating the retail prices we all pay in the form of embedded taxes buried in the cost of all consumer goods. And we've talked about this, and those of you who are on the program on a regular basis, you know this. The corporations, whatever they got as far as costs, drive down into the retail price of the item or the service that they're providing. We as a consumer are going to be hit with all of it, regardless.
Yep. All costs of doing business are ultimately passed on to the consumer who purchases the product, and that includes the cost of corporate taxes. And that's people have just we did an episode not too long ago here on FAIRtax Power Radio, digging into that in detail. But of course, as you mentioned, the FAIRtax book was written in 2005, so a lot of the numbers that Bortz and Linder used to illustrate the prebate are badly outdated. So I was looking for the 2024 FAIRtax prebate schedule. The best I could come up with, I looked on our Florida FAIRtax Educational Association website and found the 2023 prebate schedule. So these numbers are pretty close to what we'd have if the fair tax were in effect today. A single person household, a single mom or just, a single person living by themselves, no dependents, no nothing else. Their annual consumption allowance which is the poverty level for a one-person household. Poverty level, of course, varies by household size. It takes more to provide necessities for 6 kids than 2. But a single person living alone, no dependents, would have a consumption allowance of $14,580 under the 2023 prebate schedule. That is the amount of retail spending that they could do tax-free. Unfortunately, when they spend that much, it includes the fair tax. So 23% of that 14,580 is what was collected from them that they do not owe. And that comes out to be $3,553 for the year. So a single person under the 2023 prebate schedule would receive a monthly check, or more likely a monthly electronic direct deposit into their checking account, of $279. Almost $300 a month is what you would get from the prebate to pay the tax on your spending up to your poverty level. And that's just for one person. If you move this over, yeah, go ahead.
Everybody gets it. I just wanted to interject that it's not for the working poor. It's not for any particular income level individual. The millionaire gets it. The person that's only making $15,000 a year gets it. It's not calculated based on your means. It's based on how many people there are in your family. And that's the calculation. And that's an incredible amount of money when you stop to think about it. And you get to decide, you get to decide what you consider to be essential, needs. You take that money and you buy what you think is the right thing to buy that you need to have.
So as you pointed out earlier, you get your prebate to pay the taxes on your spending up the poverty level. You also bring home 100% of what you make. The fair tax gets rid of withholding, gets rid of the payroll taxes. And again, it's just a philosophical design parameter of the fair tax to treat everyone the same. So whether you've got Donald Trump's income or whether you've got your income and my income, there's a bit of a disparity there. But all of us are entitled to buy our basic necessities tax-free under the fair tax, including people with Donald Trump and Elon Musk and Warren Buffett kind of incomes. But as I say, let's rank this up a little bit. If you've got a 2-person, a married couple or whatever, just 2 adults and 2 dependents, right. The family consumption allowance under the 2023 schedule for a 4-person household is almost $40,000, $39,440. 23% of that turns out to be $9,071. So a family of 4 under the fair tax would receive a monthly prebate of $756. I don't know about you, but I'd like to have $756, and I'd like for my Social Security check to come with no withholding from it. And I would like for the dividends and interest that I get from my investments to be tax-free, which would be the case under the fair tax. And that's how this works. You just get back money that's collected from that you don't owe.
Right. And the other side of that is you are empowered with that immediate increase in take-home pay because, number one, Social Security and Medicare isn't coming out of your check anymore. It's all funded through the tax on consumption, otherwise known as the fair tax, and the payroll tax, which is the most obscene tax nightmare for everyone, is gone from the minute that the fair tax goes into effect. All of a sudden, businesses that you're working for are calculating your checks without the withholding of the federal tax. State taxes, unless you happen to live in Florida or Tennessee or somewhere else where there's no income tax in the state.
And as you mentioned earlier, we said, again, as a philosophical design parameter of the fair tax, you are allowed to buy your basic necessities tax-free. But one of the real beauties of the fair tax is that the government does not get to decide what is a basic necessity and what's not. You mentioned this earlier. You decide just by simply on what you spend your money on, what is a basic necessity? Now, I imagine that there are some people out there, and I'm not condemning them for it. I'm just saying, I don't share their same values, but there are some people out there for whom a case of Budweiser is indeed a basic necessity. You've got to have that. Well, that's something I choose not to spend my money on. But if somebody wants to spend if that's a basic necessity for somebody else, then they're spending up to the poverty level, regardless of what they buy, is tax free. The government doesn't decide what's tax free and what's not. I say in Florida,
North Carolina barbecue and cheer wine delivered to your house in Florida. That's what you're going to
yes, that is a basic necessity, and tickets for steam excursions. You see my steam locomotives back there and stuff like that. That's what I would consider a basic necessity. But then, of course, we have something like that down here in Florida. Our state sales tax does not apply to groceries. So, but you have to walk in the grocery store. There are some things on the shelf in the grocery store that are indeed taxable, and some things that aren't. So when you start making exceptions in the government trying to decide what's taxable and what's not, you talk about opening the door for lobbyists to come in and complicate the tax code beyond description, and we get the bowl of spaghetti that we've got now. That does not happen with the fair tax. You are allowed to spend, again, let's look at our figures. 2 adults household, you and I could spend $29,160 tax-free on whatever we want as our basic necessities. Our prebate would be $559 a month, which sounds good to me. I could use $559 a month to pay the fair tax with.
It's a lot of barbecue and cheer wine, folks. Let me tell you.
It is. That might even get me a Delta Airlines ticket up there to Winston-Salem to get some of the Lexington barbecue at Mr. Barbecue. So that's good too. We won't get into the 2 different styles of North Carolina barbecue, but they're both really good.
That's a whole different show on a different channel, which we probably be able to host without a problem.
Yes, we could do that. But anyway, Chapter 9. We'll say we've just kind of scratched the surface here going through the FAIRtax book on FAIRtax Power Radio. If you are unfamiliar with the concept of the prebate, you really need to educate yourself on that, because there will indeed be all kinds of dishonest misrepresentations of what the prebate is. And once you fully understand, you're just getting the tax that you paid on your basic necessities refunded back to you, so it doesn't come out of your own pocket. And that's all it is. And one other thing, real quick, we're about out of time. Who's going to do this? Well, you report to the Social Security Administration, or the ones who are going to actually administer the prebate. So once a year, you tell the Social Security Administration, these are the Social Security numbers of the people in my household. Of course, right. That can change as children are born, and kids get married and move out, or people cease to breathe. And but you adjust the size of your household. Your prebate is based on the size of your house, and that's it. That's the only thing the government has to know about you in order to administer this prebate for you. Beautifully simple, fantastic, and I can't say enough good things about the FAIRtax, because it's just that good stuff. But unfortunately, we have run out of time on this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Again, I suggest that people go to Amazon, or people go to eBay, or people go to wherever they can get books and pick up a copy of the original. It's over here. There it is. The original, upside down, white. It disappears against my background if I move it in the wrong place, but that's what it looks like. Go ahead and check that out. And again, we're going to have to see you next week here on FAIRtax Power Radio. Thank you so much for watching and listening and sharing the videos. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
Bob Scarborough.
We are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid, and also any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that Send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, I mean, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, well, it's all right here.